Welcome, everyone. The webinar will begin at the top of the hour. We encourage you to share what you are hearing and learning on social media. You can connect with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading on Facebook, like our page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use the hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tweet us about anything that you learn from today's webinar, and we'll be sure to retweet. Once again, we'll get started very shortly, and we look forward to connecting with you both on Facebook and on Twitter.
Well, hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's GLR Learning Tuesdays webinar. My name is Sarah Torian, and I'm a consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading, and I'll serve as the moderator for today's conversation. But before we get started, I'd just like to go over a couple of really quick housekeeping details. First, I would encourage you to introduce yourself. Share your name, your organization, and the name of your GLR coalition, if you're a member of a GLR coalition, using the chat box on the right-hand side of the screen. I'd also like to share that all webinar attendees today are going to be participating in listen-only mode, and that's to avoid any distractions or background noises during the presentations. But we strongly encourage your active engagement throughout the webinar, and I'd invite you to use the chat box screen to share any questions that might come to you during the presentations. And then when we move into the question and answer portion of the webinar, I'll pull them out and share them with our presenters then. As you heard before, for the opening, just wanted to remind you that today's webinar is being recorded, and everyone who registered for the webinar will receive a follow-up email including a link to that recording, a link to the slide deck, as well as links to any resources that are lifted up or shared or referenced during today's conversation. That email should go out next Monday, so keep an eye out for that. I'd also like to give a heads up that we will be posting a very brief survey poll after the presentations and during the question and answer portion of the webinar. And I really would encourage you to take just a couple of quick moments to share your thoughts and feedback with us through that poll to help us inform our planning and thoughts for upcoming webinar sessions. We really want to make sure that these are meeting your needs and providing you with valuable insights and information to support your work. Now I'd like to share just a little bit of background about GLR Learning Tuesdays. If we could go to the next slide, please. As you can see on the screen, we've got a number of great conversations planned for the coming weeks, always on Tuesdays, always starting at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And we're hoping that this predictable and reliable schedule will make it easier for you and others to make plans to join in regularly for these online learning conversations. Now, I did just say we're trying to make them predictable and reliable, so I want to lift up one shift that we have upcoming in one of our sessions, and that's with our Emerging Innovations webinar that we're doing in partner with Promise Venture Studios on February 11th. For that webinar, you'll need to use the Big Marker platform to register and join in for the webinar. So you can find the link for that registration is posted inside of our Zoom registration page where you sign up for all of our other webinars. And it is also included, a link to that is also included in all of our GLR Learning Tuesdays newsletters that come out each Friday. So just want to make sure that you are aware of this difference for the so you can plan for that upcoming. Also, just wanted to point out that that webinar will be 2 hours in length. It'll still start at 3 p.m., but will continue until 5 p.m., unlike our normal 90-minute sessions. Also, I wanted to just quickly remind you that having now launched or hosted 16 of our GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars, we have a growing archive of wonderful resources that I'd like for you to check out when you have a moment on the campaign's Community Learning for Impact and Improvement platform. That's CLIP. You can find all of the webinar recordings, slide decks, and lots of resources that were shared during these conversations. And then I also hope that you'll continue to save this date and time and make plans to join in for more of these great online learning events. Now for today's conversation. I'm very excited to be hosting this one in partnership with Early Learning Lab. I think everyone on today's webinar knows that parents are a child's first and most important teacher. And I think it's incumbent upon those of us who are seeking to support children's early learning and development to look for ways to support parents and caregivers in being successful in this really vital and critical role that they play. And the Early Learning Lab's Parent Innovation Institute offers a wonderfully or a powerful example for how we can do just that. So to discuss the Parent Innovation Institute, we have a great panel of 4 speakers with us today, including 2 that are based at the Early Learning Lab in Oakland, California, and 2 that are based in Philadelphia. To get the conversation going, I'd like to introduce our first 2 panelists, and they are Sheetal Singh and Mansi Kakkar. Sheetal is the Executive Director of Early Learning Lab, where she draws upon 15 years of experience in digital media and technology for social innovation, as she works to bring innovative ideas to scale by providing the early childhood field with professional learning and family support to ensure children's healthy development and success. Prior to joining the Early Learning Lab, Sheetal developed digital media for parents at great schools, and she also advised the global nonprofit sector on the use of technology to accelerate impact at TechSoup Global. Mansi just joined the Early Learning Lab just last month, serving as the Design and Technology Strategist. But she brings deep experience in human-centered design, having worked to strengthen design thinking capacity in diverse communities, both here in the U.S. as well as internationally. So welcome, Sheetal and Mansi. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Sarah, so much for having us. We are so pleased to be part of this series of webinars. And I just have to say kudos to you and your team, because every time I get an email from GLR listing your upcoming webinars, I'm stunned at all the great content that you're pulling together. So I am Sheetal, and I can go ahead and tell you a little bit about the Early Learning Lab before we start. So we are a nonprofit organization based in Oakland, California, but we work with partners all over the country. We were launched in 2015 with the mandate and the mission to bring tools and strategies from the business community and the social innovation sphere to think about how we can accelerate impact in the early childhood field specifically. And when I talk about tools and strategies from the social innovation space, I'm talking about the better and smarter use of technology and data, human-centered design, which we're going to talk about today, and other strategies like behavioral science. It's a super exciting place to work. Mansi has been here a little bit more than 1 month, but she'll tell you a little bit about her background. And I can tell you a little bit about some of the initiatives that we run. On the next slide, please. So our work spans professional development innovation. So we work with teachers and school districts on improving quality teaching and learning. As I said, we do publishing and analysis of different ways that technology can serve the field. But a lot of our work is focused on family engagement. And that's really because when we first launched the lab, we spent a lot of time listening to people and listening to challenges that they were having in their work. And one thing that came up time and time again was this idea that a recognition that the programs and the services that we are designing for families are not always meeting the needs of the families, and that there was a broken relationship in terms of how organizations work with families. And I was really struck by this widespread recognition that came from incredible programs across the country. I kept hearing the same thing over and over. And so we went off in our little bubble and thought, well, what can we learn from other movements in the social innovation space, and how can we apply some of those lessons to our work in early childhood? So we were really inspired by other movements in the climate change field, in the food security field, and the way that there were creations of multi-stakeholder tables, oftentimes called social labs, that brought people together to work on complex social issues in a collaborative way. And that really was the birth of this project that we call the Parent Innovation Institute, and our objective of bringing human-centered design to improve family programming and co-design with families in an early childhood context. So I will leave it there, but I think we have a number of organizations that have expressed challenges with family engagement. And Sarah, I know we have a poll question for our audience that perhaps we could ask them about now.
So as you'll see everybody in the chat box, I think it's just about posted. There we go. We would love to hear your thoughts and feedback about some of the challenges that you face around engaging parents and family in your work while our presenters are talking. But so Mansi, I'd like to invite you back into the conversation. And I'm sorry, I pulled just last month from something that was on the website, but maybe that's just when they were announcing you had joined. My apologies. But so wondering if you could help us kind of set the context for today's conversation by telling us a little bit about human-centered design and how it can be used to engage families.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Yes, I'm very excited to be part of the labs team. I've been here for 6 months now, and most of my background has been in bringing human-centered design, behavioral economics, regenerative design, and systems thinking. They all sound like big words, but they're just basically different tools and approaches. And I've applied them in different contexts, including Kenya, Thailand, Kazakhstan, and everywhere I see the power of these tools. So I'm really excited to talk about it here with the people joining us today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about what is human-centered design. I'm going to talk about how is it different from business as usual, and then maybe touch a little bit upon why do we need to be different, different than business as usual. Why do we need to shift the way we work? So first, starting about what is human-centered design. The simplest way to explain it is that it's a process of solving problems in a way that the people we're trying to solve problems for are in the center of the entire process. And that's actually easier said than done, because this is actually very intuitive for most of us. But to talk a little bit about the history of human-centered design, it was more of a product design methodology. It started somewhere in the late 1980s. It came out of some of the work that was being done at Stanford University by a person named David Kelly. He then went on to launch an organization called IDEO, which is seen as the pioneer of human-centered design, as well as the D School, if any of you have heard of that institute at Stanford, is sort of the mecca of this idea and how to practice it. And it was around the mid-2000s when this methodology seeped into the social innovation space, where nonprofits and social enterprises all over the world started bringing this methodology to the work that they were doing. So that's what human-centered design is. Now I want to talk about how is it different from business as usual, because thinking about our communities is something we all do by default. So how is this a little bit different? So to talk about this, I want to share a couple of metaphors. The first one is, and I'm guessing we all have used Google Maps in our life, maybe some of you used it to get to the place you're at today, which is basically where we know the destination, the place where we're trying to go, and we input that destination in this tool, and it shows us how to get there. We might have preferences of the scenic route, or the fastest route, or the least amount of walking. Those could be some of the preferences we hold, but this tool helps us basically get where we already know we want to go. And to contrast that, I want to contrast that with the use of a compass. Now, a compass is more something where it helps us attune to our existing environment to really understand where we need to go. And that is, I think, a very different, not just method, but also a mindset in how we approach what we're looking at. So the compass really helps us to tune into the context we're in. And so business as usual is more like a Google Maps, where we know where we want to go. We as teams and decision makers get together in our own offices and we decide where we want to go, and then we find the best ways to get there. The human-centered design approach is where we suspend the idea of knowing where we need to go, and we really tune in to what is happening in the context, what are the needs of the people, and how we can use that to first even define where is it that we need to go. So with that, I would like us to talk about the method. So how do we do this? So if you go to the next slide, right? So this is a methodology that was developed at IDEO.org, and it's from their sort of way they communicated. Every organization that's in any way practiced human-centered design ends up creating their own. So if you've heard different processes or different steps, they all mean the same thing. And I found in my work this to be the simplest to communicate the idea. So there are basically 3 steps. The first is inspiration, the second one is ideation, and the third is implementation. I see the Google Maps part as the implementation piece, which is the last thing we do. And the compass, that sort of mode, is the inspiration and ideation, where we're really trying to understand, observe the people, listen to their hopes, listen to their desires, listen to their challenges, and really use that as our fodder for inspiration and ideation. And from there, the solutions that come out, or even improvements to our programs that come from that inspiration, are really, really effective. And then we don't really have to worry about things like attendance and engagement. So that's sort of the core idea of human-centered design, where we go through these 3 steps. It's very high touch. It is really trying to involve the people we're working with. So having spoken about that, now I want to touch upon, why do we need to do it this way? Why do we see this as a powerful way? So for that, we'll go to the next slide, and I'll talk about a couple of things. One is when we talk about family engagement, I see that we talk a little bit more about attendance, and how do we, whatever we've created, how do we bring people in? And to me, the idea here is we want to include the people we're designing for starting from the beginning. So wherever you see the word diverge, it's more about going beyond your building, going into your community, and trying to bring their voices in, not just at the point of implementation, but starting right at inspiration. And the second point is that the lives of the people we, just like our lives are dynamic and they keep shifting, so is the people we're trying to design for. And using this process of constantly going out and then bringing in helps us adapt to the needs of the people we are trying to serve. So with that, I'll hand it over to you, Sarah. Sarah, we can't hear you yet.
I'm so sorry. So thank you for that, Mansi. So coming back to you, Sheetal, can you tell me how you employed this approach, this human-centered design approach, as you were planning and implementing the Parent Innovation Institute in Oakland?
Of course, I'd be happy to. So if you're like me, everything that Mansi said is really exciting, but then the question is, what does this really mean for the way that we work with families? And so I think walking you very quickly through a case study, we can start to understand the way that human-centered design can really benefit family engagement programming, especially in the early childhood context. So I'm going to tell you very quickly about the Parent Innovation Institute, the very first one that we launched in 2017 in Oakland, California. So some of the challenges that we were trying to address coming into this project was, as we spoke about, next slide, please. As we spoke about before, just this idea that there is a disconnect between programs that are serving families and the families themselves. And this idea as well that we often, even incredible high quality organizations that are serving families often do so from a rather top-down perspective. You know, we have program directors and we have all of our knowledge of the work that we've been doing. And so we think about programming to engage and support families, and we implement that, put it out in the world. And of course, oftentimes we measure the effect by seeing how people react to it, whether people are attending programs. And what we wanted to do was try to use human-centered design to flip that dynamic. And instead of developing programs fully formed within our organizations and then putting them out into the world and inviting people to participate in them, we wanted to see if we could help to create a process where the design is happening with families. So it is true co-design. And finally, one of the other objectives or the challenges that we were trying to address is that we kept seeing this, you know, all too often organizations that are serving families in a community might not be collaborating as much as they really could. And they're often serving the same families as well. And we saw that in the neighborhood that we're working with in Oakland. And we really wanted to bring these organizations together to build relationships between them as well. So next slide, please. And here you have some of the stars from our Oakland Parent Innovation Institute. And as noted before, we're really excited to be bringing this model to Philadelphia this year. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the process that we use for our pilot in Oakland. Next slide, please. So like Philadelphia, we had in Oakland an open application process. So we really put the word out in the community to organizations that were serving the families of children. It was 0 to 5 in the case of Oakland. In Philadelphia, we broadened that to 0 to 8. But we asked anyone who was serving families in an early childhood context to apply if they're interested. And we selected 4 organizations. Through the application, we asked them to identify an area of programming or a challenge that they wish to address through this project. Once we selected the 4 organizations, we asked them to form what we call design teams. And these teams were comprised of staff members and parents from their community. So it was a true team with parents. And these teams were going to go through a year-long process in which they got training in human-centered design and then coaching for a year as we took them through the process that Mansi described to you, where they learned to innovate on their programming and then create new types of programming. And so over the next couple of slides, I'm going to illustrate this process by telling you the story of one of the teams, which was the Head Start program that participated in the Oakland Pie. So this local Head Start, they had a fatherhood program. And when they applied, they said they wanted to be part of this process because they were struggling with their father engagement program. They tried lots of different types of programming for fathers, but they were finding that their attendance was really low. And they had all sorts of theories as to why that might be the case. As you might expect, they thought, now this part of Oakland that we were talking about, it's called the Fruitvale neighborhood. It is a primarily Latino community. So the staff at the Head Start thought, oh, maybe it's a cultural bias, that these fathers might not think that their role is really to engage with their child's school. And so they thought that was the problem that they needed to address. And they also considered that possibly work schedules were getting in the way and the fathers were not able to come to the programming that was offered because of that, so they could try offering at different times or on the weekends, etc. So through the process that we coached them on, this human-centered design process, we invited them to go out into their community in this design team with their parents to talk to other parents, to talk to parents in their program, talk to parents that were not in their program, and just have lots of conversations. And when they came back, they were really stunned, actually, because they had an insight, which is the beauty of this whole experience. And their insight was that it wasn't really that the fathers didn't want to engage. The problem they saw was that oftentimes it was the mothers in the family who were acting as gatekeepers and discouraging their partners from attending the programs. And the reason often they found was because the mothers had their own sense of their role in the family, and their role was as primary caretaker and caregiver. So that was where they decided to focus their efforts. And so through the process, over the course of the year, they created new programming. They created a new event called Day with Daddy that was really fun. It was sponsored by Home Depot, and so they provided tools and the kids would build with their fathers. But while they provided that programming, they had concurrent programming for the mothers. They created what they called a mommy's waiting group. And so this was a space for mothers to gather. It was a community building space for the mothers specifically. And there were some self-care aspects to that too. So they could get manicures and they can talk to each other. And then in addition, they created what they called Daddy's Promise, which was an oath that the fathers would take and then sign. And the purpose of that was really just an articulation of the father's role and their commitment to their children that was shared within the family. So next slide, please. And so the results for this team were super strong. They found, yes, their attendance did increase. 4 times as many fathers were coming to the Day with Daddy program as had attended previous programming. And, you know, importantly, the families reported through our survey an increased engagement between the fathers and their kids, and increased improved relationships within the families as a whole. So we consider that a success, so much so that actually the head of that team ended up, well, this is unfortunate for the Head Start, but he ended up leaving to start a new preschool that is wholly based on human-centered design. So he runs programming with the families full-time now. So he was so inspired by this project. And so next slide, please. And that kind of speaks to what we found as the results of the Oakland Parent Innovation Institute. Yes, we found improved programs and services. That's what we wanted to do, and that happened. And yes, we did find that we were creating what we called an innovation ecosystem. So these organizations were coming together, and they continue to work together now 2 years after the project ended. And the surprise to us, but a significant goal, was the leadership development that also took place. So not just for the staff on the teams, but the parents who participated as well, found it an incredibly rewarding and liberating experience. And they felt, for anecdotally, some of them told us they felt for the first time in their lives that people valued what they were saying. So that's a little bit about the Oakland Parent Innovation Institute, but let's talk about Philadelphia now.
Thank you so much for that incredibly inspiring and moving kind of introduction to this approach and why it's so critical and the impact that it can have. So now I understand that after demonstrating the power of this co-design process in Oakland Early Learning Lab, you're now planning to or preparing to launch a Parent Innovation Institute in Philadelphia in partnership with some local funders and leaders there. And so I'd now like to invite 2 of those local leaders to join in the conversation with us. And they are Jenny Bogoni and Jennifer Stavrakis. Jenny Bogoni is the Executive Director of Read by Fourth, the grade level reading campaign in Philadelphia, which is based at the Free Library of Philadelphia. And before taking leadership of Read by Fourth in 2015, Jenny had managed a consulting practice that provided strategic capacity and coaching support for backbone organizations leading collective impact initiatives. And she's also led the SPARK program in Philadelphia, which was working in several schools in North and West Philly to help prepare students for success in school and for high school graduation. Before that, she also served at the Philadelphia Youth Network and After School Activities Partnership. So welcome, Jenny. We also have Jennifer Stavrakis, who is a program officer with the William Penn Foundation, where she's responsible for a portfolio of grants related to family engagement and advocacy as a part of the foundation's Great Learning Program area. Before coming to William Penn, Jennifer was Director of Replication and Expansion for Public-Private Ventures, working on home visiting and literacy programs. And she's also served as an officer for the Pew Charitable Trusts, overseeing grant making for children, youth, and families in the Philadelphia region. So welcome to you, Jennifer.
Thank you.
So we're seeing a number of responses in the chat box to the question that we posed earlier about the challenges related to family engagement, some of them including language barriers, job schedules, including second and third shift positions, accessibility, building relationships, and so many more. But would love to hear from the 4 of you about some of the reasons that family engagement has proven so challenging in Philadelphia and Oakland. And maybe we could start with you, Jennifer.
Sure. So I am, as Sarah said, program officer with the William Penn Foundation. William Penn Foundation is a Philadelphia-based family foundation. We are celebrating our 75th anniversary this year. And we have, are we still?
Yes.
Okay. And we have about $100 million each year to fund programs across 3 large portfolios in Philadelphia. So I'm part of the Great Learning program here at the foundation. And through that portfolio, we're really looking at how we improve high quality learning opportunities for families here in Philly. If we can see the next slide. So about 80% of our funding for Great Learning is focused in this sort of orange box in the center, which is really focused on kindergarten readiness and reading on time by 3rd grade. So about 80% of the funding we allocate each year is in that orange box across those 6 strategies. And we're really trying to hit at literacy opportunities in every way we can. So K through 3, early childhood, the advocacy community, out in the community more broadly, and also what happens in homes. And so it was through our engaged families strategy that we really looked to support the Parent Innovation Institute. So engaged families, if you'll see on the next slide, we're really looking at how do we best support parents in their role as their child's first teacher. And so we do that through a variety of strategies. So creating and testing messages and materials to support caregiver engagement, training staff of community-based organizations, programs to better communicate with parents and deliver messages about early literacy, piloting programs that help caregivers support early learning, research and evaluation around these topics, and then how we support organizations to incorporate and sustain these practices after the time that our funding may end. So I was lucky enough to stumble across information about the Oakland work for Early Learning Lab and the Parent Innovation Institute, and reached out to Sheetal to talk about it. For my mind, actually, Parent Innovation Institute really hits all 6 of these strategies. We view ourselves as a learning foundation, a learning organization, and so bringing this program here really helps us to look at how we're supporting organizations, looking at a new model to support programming here in the city and delivering these messages. I also think, as everyone has said, we hear from our grantees that recruitment and retention of families in programming is an ongoing challenge. And there's a variety of reasons, many of which you've shared in the chat box about why that is the case, but no one has found a magic bullet for that. And so we really view this as an opportunity to learn more about parents' needs and wants and experiences as parents in Philadelphia or caregivers, and how not just the grantees that are part of this cohort can sort of adjust their programming, but how as a foundation it can influence how we make future investments. Jenny, did you want to talk a little bit about Read by Fourth?
Sure. So Read by Fourth, I think some of you who I've seen the chat box have heard about Read by Fourth, and we've interacted in some way, shape, or form before. Maybe some of you were here in Philadelphia a little over a year ago for the GLR conference here. But for those of you who are less familiar, just a quick overview that we are one of the 400 grade level reading campaigns operating across the country. And because of that, our theory of change will probably look pretty similar to and familiar to many of you. Like our lead funder at William Penn Foundation, we're really focused on this idea of 3rd grade reading and reading on grade level. And we see the route to that through school readiness, through school attendance, through out of school time, and in particular summer learning. But what might set us apart from some of the other campaigns is we also focus quite a bit on what's happening inside classrooms, both pre-K classrooms and kindergarten through 3rd grade classrooms, and the quality of that instruction. And we build all of these strategies on the foundational idea that families need to be successful, which you, of course, hear in the campaign's materials and their webinars more and more. And you see, we really talk about it as a family's love for their children is the most untapped resource in our community, and we need to figure out how to tap into that. We are super excited that the William Penn Foundation has funded this initiative in Philadelphia because, as Jennifer was talking and as you all have noted in the chat box, this idea of how do we effectively and in an ongoing way sustain parent and family engagement and leadership, I think even more than engagement, in our initiatives really is kind of the fundamental question we have to answer. The way Read by Fourth is set up is we are a network of about 150 partner organizations, each of whom have their own programs and services with communities and at different sizes and scales. And most of them require that families engage in a limited way through kind of attendance or participation in a service. But all of them are looking for ways to give parents more voice in the design of those initiatives and to make sure that what we are rolling out really aligns with what families are asking for and fit within today's realities of the competing demands on families, in particular in communities that are experiencing significant poverty and other trauma. And so I think the way we look at creating opportunities for parent leadership in our campaign, whether that be just through our partners or ultimately as really a leadership voice in the future direction of Read by Fourth, is what we hope this initiative will bring to us, first through working with a few of our partners, but then as Jen mentioned, allowing that those learnings to seep into the rest of our campaign.
Sheetal, do you have anything that you'd like to add in terms of the challenges that you saw in Oakland?
Yeah, well, I just really wanted to echo something that Jen said, that there is no silver bullet. And I think that was the realization that really led to the creation of this, because the Parent Innovation Institute, it's a process. And what it does is address the need for a different model that is responsive, that can be responsive to different communities and different families within a community. So this whole idea is that with family engagement, we're not being prescriptive. The organization isn't being prescriptive, but it's about being intentional about partnering with families and learning from them and working with them to build and improve and then constantly evolve your programming. So that's the other thing about this. This is not a one and done project. What we're hoping is to build the capacity for organizations to understand a methodology and then use it even after the Early Learning Lab has left. You know, you can hire a consultant who will come in and tell your organization what they should go through a human-centered design process and then have some recommendations for your organization. But that could get really expensive if you have to keep calling a consultant in, you know, year after year. So the idea is let's build the capacity of our own capacity, you know, in our own field. And so that's going to bring stronger outcomes for children.
I love that it's like changing the way that you do business, that you're engaging families constantly to inform your work.
Exactly.
So, I mean, and this leads perfectly into the next question, which is what are some of the major insights and takeaways from that first Parent Innovation Institute in the Fruitvale neighborhood in Oakland, and how are they now affecting your efforts as you bring this work to Philadelphia? And maybe we could stay with you, Sheetal, and to start answering that question.
Sure. And, you know, I think I could really sum that up by saying, again, it's really about understanding a local context. And so this was something that we were a little worried about going from Oakland, where we live and work, and understand and know partners, to going to Philadelphia. So I was a little hesitant and, you know, thought, well, is it right for the Early Learning Lab to come to a different community and bring this model? And I just have to say that we found the best funder in the world. Basically, Jen has been incredible in terms of connecting us with people and helping us build the partners and an advisory board and create a concept that now we call the continuity partner, which I will speak about briefly. But it's really about building those partnerships so that we are working, we're not parachuting into this community and then leaving. What we want to do is really work with partners to deeply understand the unique context of Philadelphia. And Read by Fourth and William Penn have been incredible in terms of connecting us with all of the right people that we need to be working with. And as I said, we have a new concept that we're bringing to the Philadelphia version called the continuity partners. So this is the idea that once the project is over, it's a 2-year project, we don't want to just leave and then have everything, go back to business as usual. So we have identified an organization called First Up in Philadelphia that is a leader in the community already. And so they are going to be working very closely with us throughout this process to understand the approach and to also carry it on after we are gone. So the idea is that, we are building a new approach to family engagement. We're trying to build a new approach to family engagement in Philadelphia. And First Up is really going to carry the crown moving forward. So they're going to learn it, and then they're going to continue to make sure that the lessons are carried on after we go.
So what has that planning process been like in Philadelphia as you've been thinking about how to bring it here and learn from the local partners? And maybe we could start with you, Jen, for that. As being the best funder in the world, you could share the way you've helped to connect them with some key partners and this work.
Sure, I'll take that title. Or William Penn will take that title. So as Sheetal said, we had a number of conversations before this project even went to our board to talk about, as she said, that issue of, is it okay for Early Learning Lab to parachute into Philadelphia, and what did that mean for our community? We also talked a little bit about how to limit the scope of this, because our focus is early literacy. And so while we wanted this to be as broad as possible, we also want to make sure that the programs and the outcomes they're seeking, while not completely prescriptive, that there is a literacy, it is tied to early literacy and somehow improving parent engagement in early literacy. And so, it was really great to be able to use Sheetal as a thought partner in this, to really think about what this would look like in Philadelphia, and the fact that it didn't have to look exactly like Oakland. We talked a lot about geography, and did it have to be centered in a specific neighborhood in Philly, or could the organization selected be everywhere? And in the case in Philadelphia, we decided to leave that open and to see who comes in. So we made a number of those decisions sort of as we planned and as it was funded. And then as Sheetal said, my role really, once it was funded, is to make connections across various sectors here in Philadelphia, so that Sheetal and Mansi could really start learning about Philadelphia and see who's here and who might be a right fit for the advisory board here. And I have to say, however many contacts I gave them to talk with, by the time they were here in Philly and I sat down and had lunch with them, I think they'd already talked to twice as many people and still had more people to go. So they did great at really digging in and clearly wanting to learn about our community. But on the flip side of that, I think the organizations and people they've talked to here have been really receptive to it. And we have not had that fear that we thought of people saying, who are you to come in our community and tell us how to do our work? We've really seen quite the opposite, where people have been really interested in the approach to the work. And I think so far we've had a lot of buy-in on the planning side.
Thank you for that. Maybe now we could transition to hear from Mansi, since I know that you are kind of helping to coordinate and engaging in all of those conversations with the contacts that Jen shared.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. So for me, I think for us, as we've gone into this planning phase, which sort of started in August of last year for us, it's really to hold that tension between us being aware that we're parachuting into a community, but also that because we're not from there, we bring in a lens of fresh eyes. So holding that tension where there's a complexity to really bringing in a ethical way of doing this work by really being the ones lifting and leveraging what exists in the community. And for us, the way to do that is, it's right in what we're preaching, which is practicing human-centered design. So if we're trying to bring that as a strategy, how can we use human-centered design as a strategy in the way we're bringing it into Philadelphia? And what that looked for us, as Jen was sort of hinting to, is where we spent weeks getting on phone calls with as many people as we could. Many were introduced to us, and then on the phone calls we would ask people, who else should we speak? And then we would get, our list would keep expanding. Then we went onto the ground, spend a week meeting, putting faces to names, putting places to the things we were hearing about and hearing on calls as powerful things in the community that are happening, as well as sort of some of the challenges that exist there. And after going through that entire process, we went through our own internal process of synthesizing all that we had heard, seen, felt into sort of these main buckets of what's working well here. What are some potential opportunities that we could really sort of lift, and also what are some challenges? And based off of that and sort of brewing in those insights that we were having, sort of the strategic decision of the advisory committee, the strategic decision around having a continuity partner, who should be that partner, who's on the advisory committee, all those things sort of came out of that process with a very sort of partnership. And I don't think it was an advising role with any of the people, but more a partnership with all the members of the advisory committee, with Jen, as well as with First Up. And that's been sort of our process of really trying to line up what this is going to look like as it gets implemented. And logistically, we get on phone calls once a month. We bring our questions to the table, and those are discussed amongst everybody who's on the call. So we're, from our end, the planning has been we've just felt so welcomed, as well as that our lens of having a fresh perspective into this community has been really valued. And that's, I think, the best case scenario for us to do this work.
Thank you. Do you have anything that you'd like to add, Ginny, in terms of how you're making the connections between bringing this here and the great work that's been underway with the Read by Fourth campaign?
Sure. I think my role has been a little bit similar to Jen Stavrakis's, but at perhaps a slightly different level, in that we are so excited to bring this initiative to Philadelphia to focus on this idea of parent leadership and parent engagement in the early literacy space, because we've seen that this is a capacity need of our partners, and really kind of a gate skill that if we don't figure out, our campaign can't go much further. And so we really need to figure it out. And so while we were all a little bit hesitant, I think, to bring something in from the outside, we also really knew this skill didn't currently exist in Philadelphia, and we weren't practicing it at scale in a way we needed to be. And I think the idea of a jolt from the outside was exactly what we all were looking for. And so what I've been really focused on with Mansi and Sheetal has been how to make those grassroots connections to some of our partner organizations, how to highlight some of the places where there are beginning efforts that are similar to what they're doing, but maybe not at scale, or where there has been the request for this type of capacity building, and how can we start to make those connections and make sure that they're connected to the more systems level conversation, where it was perhaps easier to make those initial introductions, so that we are getting introductions at both levels. I think the other role that we've been playing as a campaign is to think strategically about the strategies of the campaign. And even when you think about limiting this capacity building to the field of early literacy, that's still quite broad. And parent engagement across school readiness, across attendance, across summer learning, across instruction inside schools, any one of those could have been kind of a set of guide rails that would have limited this a little bit more. And even within any one of those, our partners have identified particular places that we want more parent engagement. So just kind of elevating those conversations so that ultimately when the partners that get to participate in this first round of this work are selected, we are selecting projects that will help advance the strategies of the campaign while building this local capacity.
Great, thank you for that. So now, with all of the groundwork that's happened both in Oakland and now this planning that's been underway for several months about bringing this model and this approach to Philadelphia, what are you all most excited about, and what do you think will be challenging in bringing the Philadelphia Parent Innovation, or launching the Philadelphia Parent Innovation Institute? And maybe we could stay with you, Jenny, for that.
I mean, sure, I think I kind of leaked into this answer already, but I'm super excited to make sure that where we're building capacity with partners, they're able to immediately apply it to strategies we are all trying to advance. So I think for me, that would be the big win here. I'm excited to see some of our partners that don't often get this opportunity to work on this type of initiative. I'm also looking forward to making connections across partners that don't often get to partner with each other on a shared initiative. So although we don't know yet who the selected folks will be, I think it'll be exciting if they are ones who haven't interacted in the past and beyond just learning the capacity of parent engagement, might learn from each other other skills and other resources that they can use locally.
Do you have anything you'd like to add, Jennifer?
Sure. I think for me, probably the most exciting part is really just trying to bring parent voices to the forefront instead of all of us with best intention and good heart making lots of assumptions about why parents aren't participating or engaging in particular activities. So I'm really excited about that. I think too, the exciting part and the challenge of this is that we're going to be trying something new. And if this was super easy, everybody would have been doing it already, but it's really a new mindset. And I think the questions that Sheetal and Mansi developed for the RFP are good ones, because it really helps ask those questions before people get involved of, are you actually ready to do this? Because we want to make sure that the organizations that start are understanding that this isn't going to be business as usual and that they really have to buy in. And so I think that I think even the organizations who are selected and go into this with the best intentions, that, you know, we may be riding a little bit of a roller coaster, because I imagine at different points in this process, things may get a little challenging, or not be as easy or simple as anybody participating hoped it might be.
What about for you and Mansi and Sheetal? What are you most excited about, and what do you think will be most challenging as we make this transition from the West Coast to the East Coast?
I'll speak to the challenge first, because what I'm excited about is connected to it. So one of the challenges, and I don't think this is particular to Philadelphia, I think it's just a systemic challenge whenever we're working with the complexity that we're working in, is that sometimes as organizations, we're in this larger ecosystem, the structures we create to serve communities can sometimes be the very thing that keep the people out who we need to be allies. And so for me, bridging the grassroots with sort of the larger systemic organizations, I see as a challenge as well as an opportunity. So for me, what's exciting is through this experience to really bring together these entities to really build relationships based on trust, or at least attempt to do that, because we're trying something new, so why not aim high?
Yeah, did you cover what you're excited for today?
I am, yes.
Okay, good. I echo, what Mansi said. I know that the challenges are what excite me. First of all, I'm really excited for working in Philadelphia because of the openness that we have felt and the welcome that we felt from so many organizations across the community and the people. So that's where we're really blessed, I think, to be able to work in Philadelphia. I'm also really excited to see how the model for the Parent Innovation Institute will shift as it is, responsive to the unique needs of the community in which we're working. And we didn't mention this before, but we have partnered with Mathematica on the evaluation for this project. And that's another thing that I'm really excited about, because they've already just really helped us think about the theory of change and identifying, specific outcomes that we're shooting for. So that's also something I'm really excited for. Not to mention all of the partners, but first up in particular, and this idea of having a continuity partner. Again, I don't see this as a unsurmountable challenge, but it does add a layer of complexity as we now think not only how do we run this program successfully, but how do we ensure that the lessons continue after we're gone. So that is a challenge and an opportunity for excitement at the same time.
So we're getting lots and lots of questions about, okay, what is this process? What's coming? What are the teams? What's it going to look like in Philly? So I'd love it if you could kind of walk us through that. And Mansi, if you could get a little bit closer to the microphone, I think some folks are having trouble hearing you. So we want to make sure they can hear this response.
Great. Please let me know if you still can't hear me as I'm doing this part of our conversation. I really want to make sure everybody can hear me. All right, so we'll go to the next slide, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what's happening. So we have officially launched our application, which is going to help us find those 4 organizations that we're going to bring along on this journey. It's a year-long journey, and we're looking for organizations who are really looking to strengthen their early literacy outcomes and are working specifically from communities that have families with children from birth to 8. So that's sort of the age group we're looking at, but we're trying to keep it open in the sense that we don't want that to be a restriction. So we're looking for people that are open, that are really willing to learn, that are really looking to try something new. So apart from this sort of eligibility criteria, we also have that layer of what sort of an organization would really make the most of this. The application is open until February 7th of this year, and through this process, we're going to find 4 organizations, and our advisory committee, as well as other advisors and the continuing partner, are going to be on sort of part of the process of finalizing those 4 participating organizations. And the link to apply is going to be in the chat box or be shared eventually. So if you're interested in that, please go ahead and apply. And if you have any questions about this process at any point, please feel free to reach out to me directly. I think my information will also be shared. So now if we go to the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about just what the timeline of this process is, as well as what participating organizations are going to get. So one of the major benefits of being part of this is not that you're getting just a training where you're learning something, but actually you're being supported along the entire process of implementing this strategy. So you not only get capacity building, but you also get through monthly coaching, as well as exposure to other peers who are going through this process. So you're learning from them as well. You kind of have sort of a group of people together, you're walking on this journey to bring this, because to be honest, this is a hard process. And the entire way we've designed this is with that intention, what will make the learning and implementation most successful. The other thing is that because it is focused on family engagement, it really brings organizations the opportunity to really tackle that challenge, bring it front and center rather than being an afterthought or something we think about after we've developed our programs and strategies. And finally, they also have access to local partner who's going to help them build their sustainability plan, including the continuity partner, including our partners, Mathematica, and we're also providing a $15,000 stipend to support the costs involved in the team doing the work throughout this 1-year process. So now if we go to the next slide, I'll quickly talk about the timeline. So as you can see, we've started the application process, which has already happened. In February 7th, we are going to close the application and choose our 4 participating organizations. And in March, we're going to announce those 4 participating organizations, as well as help them design their teams, which are going to go through that entire process with us. In April of 2020, we are going to have our first sort of launch party as well as the human-centered design training, which is going to be for 2 days. And for the 1 year post that, so in May 2021, we will have a final capstone showcase celebration where all these teams get to share their entire process and what they've learned. And in between those two sort of markers, we have monthly coaching calls where all the teams will get access to. We're also trying to find local design facilitators from educational institutes in Philadelphia who can support teams locally. And we're also looking at a January 2021 deadline for the continuity partner to work with the teams to build their sustainability plans, And we are also planning some small sort of engagements throughout the process where at the midpoint, we're looking at doing a virtual share out to kind of bring everybody on the same page around the process of the teams and kind of just have a storytelling moment for everybody to see where they've, what they've been through. And I think that's all I have. So if anybody here is curious or interested or knows an organization in Philadelphia who would make a really good participant, please forward them this information. We really want to make sure we bring in organizations that can make the most of this opportunity, and we're really excited about that.
So Mansi, we had a quick kind of clarifying question from somebody in terms of organizations that might be interested in applying. Are we talking only about nonprofit organizations, or could other types of entities apply to be a part of this process?
Any entity can apply as long as, so if they go into the application, they can see we have listed the eligibility criteria. As long as they meet that, they can be any form of organization, any legal entity, they can apply.
Perfect, that's very helpful. So we've also had a number of folks asking questions very excitedly about, wait, how can I join in? So it seems like there's a few folks that are interested in possibly bringing the Parent Innovation Institute to their communities, folks that are not in the Philadelphia area. So can you all share what it takes to successfully bring the Parent Innovation Institute to a local community? And also, before we get started in responding to that, I just wanted to let everybody know that we're sharing a special poll right now. So if you are one of those people that is interested in bringing the Parent Innovation Institute to your community, you can click yes right now, and I'll share the list with the team at Early Learning Lab so they can follow up with you directly. But now, I'm sorry, go back to you, Sheetal. Oh, sorry, you're still on mute.
I have unmuted. Thank you so much. Sorry about that. So we, I think looking at our partners here on the webinar, they kind of illustrate what we need to bring this programming to a city. So a funder and strong local partners who understand the context, the diversity of organizations that are serving families and children in the community and can provide those connections. That's really the base. I mean, we're looking for a cohort of organizations in a community that are open to this process, which I will acknowledge can be very scary. As with anything, continuous quality improvement, etc., human-centered design is starting from a place where you have to admit that maybe you don't have all of the answers. And I know that's really difficult in our line of work. And so openness, wanting to improve and do better and do more to serve families and children, those are the basic building blocks that we need to bring this project to a community.
Is there anything that our partners in Philadelphia, Jennifer or Ginny, would like to share in terms of your insights about what it takes beyond what you've already shared, of course?
Well, I think I'll shine a light back on Sheetal and Mansi and just say I think it also takes the openness to learn and curiosity that they bring to this process as they're entering the community. And so I really thank them for that. And the fact that we are looking at the Parent Innovation Lab, not just as a model that has to be done exactly so, but as a set of strategies that can be adapted to their local environments, right? And so I think keeping that concept up front of what are the key strategies, what are the non-negotiable elements for implementing with fidelity while also being respectful of the local community. And I think human-centered design is just perfect for that type of replication. So I think that's a key element.
I would add to, from the funder's perspective, that the fact that this is a cohort model is particularly appealing. One, because you get to bring this learning to more than one organization. But two, I think, as Sheetal and Mansi have described the program, the peer learning part of this is a huge aspect to this program. And so having the funding available so that there is a group of organizations who is able to go through this, I think is very important. And it's important to sustaining the learning too after the Parent Innovation Institute concludes sort of its formal bookends.
Great, and so Sheetal and Mansi, coming back to you, is there some information that you'd like to share? We've already got, I think, close to 50 people who have said that they are interested in learning more and maybe thinking about bringing this. Are there some resources they could look to?
Yeah, definitely. So on the Early Learning Lab website, you can read the case study of the Oakland Parent Innovation Institute. You could read about the Philadelphia Parent Innovation Institute and what we're planning. That's where you'll also find the application that you could forward to other organizations that you might know in Philadelphia. There's also a video available online for more visual learners, so you can hear directly from some of the people who participated in the Oakland version. And then anyone could always contact us. Our website, our email addresses, I believe that they were up on a slide. Yes, there they are. And then they're also up on the website. So we welcome any and all questions. And I just wanted to say, one thing that we have been talking about is how it's a model that is, it's concrete, which is the power, right? And there are concrete strategies that we're trying to bring to organizations, but at the same time, there is flexibility. It's adaptable, and so that is something you should hold in your head. Obviously, in Philadelphia, we are working to support early literacy outcomes, and I imagine most of the people who are on this webinar are also interested in early literacy outcomes. But just know that there are other child development outcomes that we are speaking to other people about, and it's a very flexible model that can be used for a range of outcomes. So, with that.
Thank you for that. And I just wanted to point out to everybody on the webinar with us today, I've posted the links for those two that were on the previous slide about the case study and the link to the Early Learning Lab website in the chat box, so you can access them there directly right away. So now I'd like to transition to some of the questions and share those back with the presentation team to get your thoughts and feedback and responses to them. And the first one will be coming back to you, Mansi. When you were introducing us all to the concept of human-centered design, you were talking about diverge and converge. And so maybe we could go back to that slide and you could kind of explain that for us again.
Absolutely. Yeah, so for just this clarity, the idea of divergence is basically when you're going broad. That can mean, one, that you are going beyond your own usual suspects. So if you make decisions in a certain team, a design team, or a certain group of staff members, diverge means how can you go beyond that to really cross the boundaries of your knowing and get in inputs from outside. Converge is the opposite of that you've already gone out and you've seen, heard more than what you know, and then you come back in to synthesize that as a smaller team, as a smaller core group of people who are asking a question or trying to solve a problem. So that's one layer. So it's really about, to speak to this slide, it's like, we normally tend to diverge after we have created a strategy or created a program. We've created something and then we diverge and says, okay, who wants this? So the human-centered approach is the opposite, which is even before you create something, or even if you're trying to improve something and you decide how to improve it, you first diverge and go beyond to really understand what it is that is needed and how can that be put into place in a way that will be actually responsive to people's needs. So that's how we think of diverge and converge. Does that help?
That is helpful. Thank you. So another question that we had is kind of getting back to who gets to define what the problem is that you're trying to solve. You have talked about this a little bit since this question was posted, but how is that problem defined and framed? Is that something that you engage the community in as well, or and how does that work?
So our approach has been to work closely with our funder to really understand the objectives and what the problem we're trying to solve through this process is. Jen, we knew that this was part of an early literacy portfolio and program, and so that was going to be core to whatever we did. But as Jenny also pointed out, even within early literacy, there's so many ways that you could slice and dice that. We could have focused on English language learners. We could have focused on the effects of trauma. So we set about a process where we worked with the first couple of months of this project were really what we called sense making. So those were all the conversations that we had with as many people as possible to really understand what were people saying were some of the challenges of the community. And then we brought some ideas back to both our funder and our advisors to really get a sense of where people found the greatest need. And what we decided, and it could differ with different communities and different partners and different funders, we decided to hold a focus on family engagement and early literacy, and to remain somewhat open to how individual organizations who might participate in this project were going to address those roles. But that was a decision that we made for this program, and in another instance, we might come to a different conclusion. As I said, it's a pretty adaptable model. Jen, did you want to say anything about that, what we call the strategic direction and the many conversations that I had kept bugging you, like, but what about this and what about this?
Yeah, I think you encapsulated it really well, which is, as a funder with a board that sets very clear priorities, we know that early literacy for education is our focus. And so we had to have enough guide rails around it that when someone got into the program, they weren't going to focus on an issue related to like perinatal health, right? And so we needed those guide rails on so that organizations that were involved were doing work that in the long run helped further our sort of overarching mission. But we didn't want to tell organizations specifically what they needed to focus on. And I really valued your input in learning sort of how other organizations came to those decisions. And I think as a funder, we really wanted to release that control so that organizations were coming to the table focusing on the issues that were most important or critical to them.
Sorry, I was still muted. So some of the people, we've had a question about like some of the nuts and bolts kind of questions, like, do you pay the parents for their time when they're engaging and coming to these planning meetings with you? How do you show parents that you honor and value their time and contribution? Is that a piece of this?
Yeah, so the way we do this is we provide a $15,000 stipend to each participating organization, and we leave it to the organization's discretion to how they want to use that. And a big aspect of a really human-centered design process, and this is something we coach them through while they're creating their design teams, is the equity question, which is if this is inaccessible for a parent to participate and be part of the whole process, which is integral to the benefit of going through this process, then how can they create some kind of incentive for the parent to be part of the process? And sometimes it does look like that, where teams end up providing some kind of financial support or other kinds of coupons or things to compensate for the inaccessibility of it for parents.
And if it's okay, I did want to, I think this brings up a really important point, and something that we're trying to do with this project is look at human-centered design through an equity lens, because we are mostly working in low-income communities. And I think in the regular human-centered design world, this is something that maybe isn't always addressed. Oftentimes the way that this is taught, it's quite academic, there's jargon, and we learned this through Oakland that doesn't work. And there are some concepts that just don't resonate with different types of people, and especially people from different socioeconomic levels. For example, one of the things that you'll hear when you listen to practitioners of human-centered design talk about is that you have to be willing to fail. We'll talk about failing forward, failing fast. And we've found that amongst the parents and even some of the staff who are participating in Oakland, they did not appreciate that. And some of the feedback was, we don't have the chance to fail. Like if we fail, failing is not something that we're allowed to do. And it's, we had to learn from that and kind of think about how we are addressing some of these issues and be really sensitive to people who are coming into this from other cultural contexts. So I think that is something that we are trying to do and bring in the way that we're teaching human-centered design as well.
Great point and great insight, and good to know that there needs to be a translation from the way a lot of practitioners have traditionally discussed this and focused on it. And so I guess in terms of the Philadelphia implementation, some of those questions about the incentives for parents, that's something that that'll be figured out after the application process, and so they'll all deal with that then. Okay. So we've had some folks that, again, are really interested in, so how do I join in on this fun? And so Christina Morales is asking if there's any kind of resources, whether it's a white paper, and maybe it's the case study that we had posted previously, but something that they could take to a funder and say, this seems really exciting. We'd like for you to invest in making this happen in my community.
Yeah, I would invite anyone to take the case study, the video, to a funder to start a conversation. We are always here to support if people need additional documentation. We do a lot of helping to develop concept notes that we might not actually be involved with the project, because that's the other thing. We really want to, at the lab, we want to spread the use of human-centered design to improve outcomes for children. And sometimes that will be the Early Learning Lab running a Parent Innovation Institute, but sometimes it will just be other people doing this, taking this idea and carrying it forward in their own way, and we are not involved. So we are here to support any organization that wants to bring these tools to their community in whatever way we can.
Yeah, and if just to quickly add to that, if we can go back to slide 30, I just want to point out the one way is to bring this institute directly to the city of program, which is what we're doing in Philadelphia. The second, which is sort of what Sheetal is speaking to, which is this coaching and capacity building, where reach out to us and we can figure out a way to support you, have your conversation with your funder or whatever that is, if the resources we've already shared are not enough. And the third, and this is more of a future goal that we have, and we're actively building this, which is where we want to provide a sort of a playbook where you can take that playbook and implement this on your own. And the coaching and the playbook can sort of go hand in hand in how it is implemented. Again, for us, our goal is to give it to as many people as possible. And if you have ideas of what will be supportive to you, which is not something we've spoken about, please tell us that, because that helps us learn as well and provide those opportunities for you to engage with us.
And so just to make sure I heard correctly, you were talking about that playbook. Is that something that's in development, right? That's not available currently?
That is in development. We're very excited.
Okay. So do you have a sense of how much this costs? And this might be a question for Jen in terms of what the investment was to bring this to Philadelphia. But some people have been asking about what is the potential funding cost to bring this? And it might be different prices for these different approaches, as you've discussed, kind of with Early Learning Lab, kind of bringing it in and being that close-in partner in implementation, or this other kind of coaching capacity. And, once the playbook is developed, if you have a sense of how much those two models or two approaches would cost in terms of replicating this.
Yeah, I can talk about sort of the Cadillac model, which is importing them directly into your city. So we are supporting, our grant was for $490,000 over 2 years. However, $110,000 of that is for the evaluation piece of it, which was really important to us. One, because this was sort of the second implementation of this after Oakland, and so we wanted to learn more about it, but also because our hope is to grow this work moving forward, and so that evaluation piece, again, was very important to our own learning. But that was a big chunk of this overall budget.
And that does also include the stipends for all of the organizations as well.
Yeah.
Mansi and Sheetal, do you have a sense of what the not Cadillac model might cost?
We're actually,
Honda?
yeah, we're in conversation with a partner in Arizona, actually, on a different model where we would not come in to run this, but really provide some coaching so they can run this themselves. And I would say that, I mean, there'll be costs for that organization. So when they go to a funder, they'll have their own costs, but it was roughly, our costs were greatly reduced because we are kind of coming in as a consultant over the course of a year. So that's, you know, another way to slice and dice it. I think it'll vary based on the partner organization and the resources that they're going to put into it. But it's just a different way to just get a little bit of mind share from us at a greatly reduced cost, and then, you know, whatever the partner sees. The stipends are the same. The evaluation costs would probably be lower, but it could be the same, you know, depending on what that funder and that partner wants to do as well.
Great. Well, we're seeing some interest in learning more about that coaching model and the playbook as it's developed. So we'll definitely want to keep folks posted as that moves forward. We've got one other question from Kim Davenport about sustainability. So you shared that amazing model about kind of the way that the work of the Head Start program in Oakland changed as a result of going through this Parent Innovation Institute and human-centered design process. You know, how did those changes, how is that sustained? What is the sustainability approach and model? And is it, you know, maybe just making this a part of the daily practice and so it doesn't need to be continually funded? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole goal, is that it doesn't need to be continually funded because this is a capacity building model. I would say that one of the most important aspects for sustainability within an organization is leadership buy-in. So if, you know, it's one thing to even make the time and space in the way that you're allocating resources for someone to do this work once, or, you know, part of your team to do it once. But one of the things that we really try to express, and we have an interview process as part of our application process so that we're able to speak to people in leadership at these organizations, is to understand that this, again, it's not a one and done thing, that we're really asking to make room for a different approach to program development and family engagement. So that means not just making the time and space and allocating the resources for people to participate in this once, but then to acknowledge that in an ongoing way, we might have to shift the way that the amount of time that we're allowed to give people to engage with families or engage with their community or do that divergent process that Mansi was talking about.
I would just like to point out a couple of things for folks who are joining us on the webinar today. Is first, I did just launch the survey poll a couple of moments ago, and I really would again encourage you to take a couple of quick moments to respond to that survey, share with us your feedback. Also, just wanted to note that a member of the Early Learning Lab team, Diana Choon, has been posting in the chat box a place where you can sign up to receive regular updates, probably including when the playbook is released. That would be there. So you can click on that website and do that there. And there's also an email address that you can use to reach out directly to the team at Early Learning Lab. So would invite you all to do that. We've, I think, addressed all of the questions that I saw in the chat box. If I've missed your question, please alert me to that and we can come back to it. But I just wanted to reach out to each of our presenters today, see if you have any final closing thoughts before we move on to share some of our upcoming webinars and close out for the day.
I guess I can share one thing, which is we've talked about the human-centered approach and capacity building for organizations. And I think that just reflecting on my experience having done this in other contexts and industries outside of the early childhood space, one thing that I've recognized is it's a capacity that needs to be built not just in organizations that are serving families, but also the entire ecosystem, which includes funders, evaluators, and all sort of players in this ecosystem. Because it's once we all, and as we've spoken about in Philadelphia, we just found that synergy. We found, or rather they found us to create an ecosystem where there's that shared sort of realization why this approach is important. And I think that that's almost like the next level of this, where we build this capacity in organizations, but then we can have this conversation with funders and other sort of systemic levers, which can also be sometimes an inhibiting factor to bring this approach in our work. So yeah, I would just point that out.
And I might, at risk of, oh, I'm sorry, did I cut you off, Sheetal? Okay, at risk of opening up a whole other topic at the end of a webinar, maybe one of the things that came up in some of the last answers that I think is super important about this model, and it'd be interesting to think about how we talk about this more nationally, is this barrier of the cost of participation for parents when we're asking them to participate, not just in terms of when we hold the events, but that those of us who work for these organizations are paid to be part of these processes, and parents often aren't. And so how do we not only make sure we budget for that, but how do we put systems in place to make that part of our thinking? I hope there's really great learning that comes from this initiative here in Philadelphia about those types of processes that we can share.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And I know that that was a question that came in as well that we didn't quite address. I mean, we sincerely hope that the organizations are going to use their stipends to compensate the parents for some of their time, you know, as much as possible. And this is something that we see time and time again. As we talk about partnering, we do really need at a systems level some better way of compensating and honoring the time that parents are giving us.
Anything that you would like to add, Jennifer, before we close?
I just really appreciate the opportunity to talk about this program. We're really excited to bring it here to Philadelphia. And I know I'll speak for Jenny and myself that, you know, we're happy to field any questions from others as well about planning that we've done on our end, or, you know, from the foundation side, the cost and how we messaged it to our board and tied it to our strategy and all of those pieces as well.
Well, thank you all. I hope you've noticed in the chat box there's been so much engagement and interest in this model. We've had about 200 people join us today, and a couple other hundred that registered that are planning to join after the fact. So it's amazing. It's heartening to see the interest in this model, and I'm excited to see where it goes as more people have a chance to learn from what you're doing and engage in it. So I just want to thank you all for taking the time to join us today. Sheetal Singh, Mansi Kakkar, Bogoni, and Jennifer Stavrakis. I also want to thank all of you who joined in for today's conversation, sharing your questions, sharing the challenges that you're facing around family engagement. I hope that you found this as interesting and inspiring of a conversation as I have. And I want to make sure to remind you to join in for our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. As you can see, we've got 3 of our upcoming ones posted on the screen right now. Just want to share a quick reminder for those of you who might not have joined us right at the top of the hour that there'll be a slight change with the webinar scheduled for February 11th. That's the show and tell webinar that we're doing in partnership with Promise Venture Studios. We will not be using the Zoom platform for that day. We'll be using Big Marker. The registration information for that is, however, available on our Zoom registration page, as well as all of our promotional emails, the GLR Learning Tuesdays newsletters that come out each Friday. You can find the link for that there. Also wanted to make sure that you notice that that one is from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Not our standard 90-minute webinar, but hope you can join us for all 3 of these upcoming conversations. Stay tuned. There'll be more planned for later in February and the rest of the spring. But thank you all so much for joining us. Hope to see you soon.